It is my respectful submission that the public interest so requires. Therefore, this House will meet on today's date. Minutes of the meeting held on Monday, March 29, 2021 to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I so move.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers.
Honorable member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am commanded to lay the Barbados Economic and Social Report 2018.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Please turn on the mic.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 1. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to extend the public health emergency in accordance with the Emergency Management Act, Cap 160A.
Honorable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Leader of Government Business in the House has indicated to you in writing, it is in the public interest that this chamber be called back from its Easter recess to pass the resolution that is to be found at order number 1. This resolution, Mr. Speaker, seeks the consent of the House of Assembly for the extension of the Governor General's proclamation that Barbados is in a state of emergency until the 25th day of September 2021. Mr. Speaker, the legal position is really quite simple. The Governor General has power under the Emergency Management Act and under other statutes, including the Constitution, to issue a proclamation that the country is in a state of emergency. Those proclamations, Mr. Speaker, I remind you, are not things that can be issued whimsically. There must be a specific factual matrix that underpins or that justifies Her Excellency taking such a major step. It is clear to us that since last year, Barbados has been under significant threat from the global pandemic, COVID-19. We will now, sir, be in our 3rd state of emergency. And so this process is one that is familiar to the chamber because we have on several other occasions extended the Governor General's proclamation. It is a sad thing, sir, that we are still in this place, but the fact of the matter is that we always knew that fighting the coronavirus would require long and sustained action on the part of the government and long and sustained discipline on the part of the people of Barbados. And largely, sir, largely, the public of Barbados has been cooperative in helping us to help the entire country to weed out the scourge of the coronavirus. But as the year began, sir, we had some very difficult times to face. We know that there was a tremendous spike in the number of cases, and that required us to adopt, at that time, rather draconian measures to decrease the rate of COVID infections. But the Prime Minister has always made it quite clear that even though we might shut down sharply, we would engage in a process of gradual reopening so that the lives of Barbadians can return to some semblance of normalcy. And, sir, Barbadians are not people who are and have grown accustomed to things like curfews, days where you can't access supermarkets, hours when you can't do various things. That has not been our life for generations past. But unfortunately, COVID has put us in a place where, as a country, we have had to impose and accept the imposition of restrictions on our freedom, but in a good cause. I've asked the member for the city to wrap up this debate, and as Minister of Health, he will be able to share with you the progression, the downward progression of the COVID numbers, and he will be able to say whether he is satisfied, unsatisfied, reasonably satisfied with those numbers. But one thing is certain, that if we do not steer the course in terms of maintaining a discipline in our society in how we deal with the COVID protocols, how we deal with each other, then, sir, those hard-fought gains can be lost in the twinkling of an eye almost, as they were lost at the start of the year. Having consulted with the Chief Medical Officer, having consulted with the COVID, the Cabinet Subcommittee on COVID, and having consulted with the Minister of Health, we feel that it is vital that we extend the state of emergency for a further 5 months so as to be able to have a legal framework which allows for the imposition of those restrictions. And that's what this is, Mr. Speaker. And if it probably bears repeating, because I think members of the chamber will know that various individuals have gone to court to seek declarations that our actions as a government have been unconstitutional. The courts will deal with that, and it is entirely improper for us to weigh in on matters that are sub judice. And therefore, that's not my point. The point I wish to make is that in any environment where restrictions are going to be imposed on the citizen, there has to be a reasonable basis for doing so. Mr. Speaker, this is not intended to be something that will last us forever, though I'm well aware that the last 15 or 16 months may well have seemed, well, not 15 or last 14 months, may well have seemed like an inordinately long period of time for many of us. Certainly our schools continue to be challenged, our businesses continue to be challenged. Every day, every single day, we get requests from one organization or another, one entity or another saying, can we do this, can we do that? And regrettably, there are still some activity that, based on the advice of the health officials, we cannot yet allow. But in every instance where that decision has been made, it is made purely on the basis of the question or the answer to the question, what is in the best interest of Barbadians at this time? Is it preferable for us to open up and allow a full slate of freedoms and activity which increases our risk of COVID spread increasing? Or is it better in the interest of the long-term safety of all Barbadians to keep those restrictions in place. And as I said, having done those consultations, we consider it is important to keep those restrictions in place. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, we shut down sharply and we have opened gradually. As we speak, as I speak in this chamber, all businesses in Barbados have been allowed to reopen. Just a few weeks ago, that was not the case. And those that were allowed to reopen had limited hours. We have moved past that. Not out of any recklessness, but because the numbers that we have seen give us confidence to know that the risk is less and less. And Mr. Speaker, people on the other hand have been saying to me and I know to others, man, why you all removing the curfew? We didn't like it when it was 9 o'clock. I suspect there are people in this chamber who actually liked it when it was 9 o'clock. But unfortunately or fortunately, we have to weigh the interests of all Barbadians when we consider these issues. So as at today, Mr. Speaker, virtually all businesses are allowed to open. The only things that are specifically still closed in terms of enterprises are nightclubs and discotheques. That's the only thing that is specifically closed. Everything else that is allowed to open, though, has some level of restriction or another. All businesses, all enterprises are subject to stringent application of the COVID protocols, but they can run their normal hours. We've allowed since the start of this current directive, bars to open. But we've said, because of the risk of COVID spread, we're only going to allow you to be open to a maximum of 50%. Churches, we've given them the flexibility of having regular services. Religious institutions can have regular services, as you know, with no limit as to numbers other than that is the consequence of a 6-foot separation between the others. And you know, we've had to consider that again and again and again and again, and there are some issues. I'm not going to speak about the church in the north. I leave that for the minister to speak about. But you know, there are churches which have been saying that they want to pack in greater numbers. They want us to reduce it from 6 feet to 3 feet. There are also churches who we've received complaints that some churches are increasing the risk of COVID spread, not so much in terms of the space, but for the length of time that they keep the congregation in the church setting. So this has never been an easy road for us who are in the position to make decisions about what we open and what we don't open. It's been very hard. And already this morning I've had numerous messages. People are anticipating the new directive and they want to know, what do we do about this and what do we do about that? The directive and the various protocols that are established by the COVID unit establish the broad parameters. So we've said that you're not allowed to have parties. The consequence of that is that the party boats, there are just a few of them, but those party boats who would ordinarily be taking out people for parties at sea, they're not going to be allowed to operate. But what is the public interest in that restriction? It is not that we are a bunch of fuddy-duddies who don't want Barbadians to enjoy themselves. We are, however, the people who are charged with the responsibility of safeguarding the lives of all Barbadians, and therefore those kinds of activities where we know that people are going to be up against each other and drinking and the music and the dancing and then the mask off and so on, those kinds of things present risk. And therefore, in the balancing act, we prefer to lean towards the continued health of Barbadians. So, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, in her address to the country yesterday, indicated that once more, consistent with our approach, a gradual opening, we feel that we're in a position to do still more things in order to provide Barbadians with a little more flexibility. And so, on this occasion, after very careful analysis, we are in a position to allow, we feel, cinemas to open and the drive-in. Now, that was no easy exercise to work through. Not at all. The drive-in was perhaps the easier of the two to consider, because if people come in a car together, they're effectively in a bubble. So the issue isn't whether you get COVID in the drive-in or not. You came in a vehicle together. But we had to consider issues like the concession stands and things of that sort, and the toilets and so on. Those kinds of things where people are bound to be in contact with each other. So stringent protocols are being put in place in relation to how the drive-ins will function. But even more stringent protocols are being put in place, have been put in place in respect of how the cinemas will function. And so, based on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer and others, it has been determined that cinemas, for example, will have to severely limit the number of people who can be in the area of the concession stands to buy their refreshments either before or during the show. And that limit, we've determined, given the spaces involved, is 25 people, up to a maximum. So if you imagine Lime Grove or Olympus or whatever it is, think the concession stand. I don't think Lime Grove has a concession stand though. But, you know, no more than 25 people are going to be allowed there. And we are going to be monitoring it. We are asking every establishment to self-monitor. Every establishment has to self-monitor, whether it's a supermarket, a funeral home, whatever it is, they have the responsibility to self-monitor. But areas that are of especially great, that are at especially great risk, we will also be doing a fair amount of monitoring. So the cinemas have agreed that in terms of their seating arrangement, it will be every other seat in every other row, or that may not be the precise thing, but the point is you're going to be distant laterally, and you're also going to be distant in terms of in front and behind. Now, the economic activity is important, but safeguarding the lives of Barbadians is even more important. The other area of relaxation has to do with the time. Instead of for those curfew days, instead of that time being 11 o'clock, it will now be 12. So we're giving Barbadians an extra hour. But in every case, we are asking Barbadians, please maintain your discipline. Please maintain your discipline. We are slowly allowing more and more freedom. But freedom and the ability to live as you please brings with it significant responsibilities, and those responsibilities have to do with maintaining your physical distance, wearing your mask, being responsible at all times in relation and keeping the risk of the spread of COVID foremost in your mind. In relation to churches, we've agreed now that churches will be able to resume communion, but limited to individual portions of the sacrament. So if you're serving communion wine, it has to be in an individual glass. Okay? So those kinds of things we're allowing more and more of, but again, at every stage, the arrangements have to be such as to minimize risk. Baptisms had been prohibited, but we're allowing baptisms to resume so long as the officiant wears masks and face shields. In relation to our Sunday activity, let me say that last Sunday, Mr. Speaker, we felt it was important to allow Barbadians such an exemption as would allow them to fully do their cleanup. And we allowed hardware stores, we asked hardware stores to open last Sunday. Those arrangements will continue for this week, this Sunday, and also during the currency of the coming directive. So on this Sunday, hardware stores will be allowed to open, and you will have the freedom to do as you need to do in order to be able to continue the cleanup. Now remember that there's a current directive that ends on the 26th, and the 26th is Monday. 26th, I think, is Monday. So this current directive will not yet be out, but I'm making it clear to the country that in the same way that last Sunday we allowed hardware stores and an exemption to allow national cleanup, that arrangement continues in place, that exemption continues in place for this Sunday. But also for the following 2 Sundays in the directive to come, hardware stores will be allowed to open, and the national cleanup effort will also be exempted and allowed to continue. Obviously, the issue of ash, it is true that we haven't had any ash fall probably since weekend, but there is still a lot of ash out there. It's on your roofs, it is in your clothes, it is on your furniture, it is everywhere. And we mustn't fool ourselves into thinking that its cleanup will be accomplished fully by a week's effort or 2 weeks' effort. The government is certainly, and that's not the time for this, but the government is putting a lot of effort into cleaning up our streets. And right now there are about 1,500 Barbadian men and women who are out there cleaning up our streets. But in order for that to be fully beneficial, we also have to clean up at us. Because there are those of us whose driveways flow into the street. Okay? So, and our trees and our shrubbery blow into the street as well. So in order to fully complement the work of the government's team and to accomplish the national cleanup that we need to do, we also need to continue that cleanup effort, and it can't be accomplished in 1 weekend or 2, and therefore for this weekend, exemption to allow cleanup and also hardware stores, and in the current directive, it will be stipulated that for the purposes of doing cleanup, the exemptions won't apply on Sundays. And hardware stores will be allowed to open on Sundays. The general theme that we have insisted on for Sundays has been that those days will be slower days. We can't call them shutdown days, but they will be slower days, and therefore we will have restrictions continuing in relation to what can and can't be done. So in the new directive, Mr. Speaker, supermarkets will still not be allowed to open on Sundays, but bakeries and so on will be able to open to bake bread and to sell. So the same restrictions as obtained last Sunday and as will obtain this Sunday will obtain at this point for the 2 Sundays in the coming directive. So anticipate that those are going to be slow days. But of course, Mr. Speaker, we have 2 public holidays in quick succession, and which will be during that coming directive: Heroes Day, the 20th of April, and May Day. And nobody has to remind Barbadians, I hope nobody has to remind Barbadians, that even though there is a spirit of festiveness and festivity associated with bank holidays, this is not the time to drop our guard. We're not imposing any extraordinary restrictions for those 2 days. We're not. For the purposes of the directive, they're just plain days, except of course that the businesses that won't be allowed to open. Let's put it this way. The very same restrictions that we have for Sundays, we will have for those 2 bank holidays. But you will notice that May Day is a Wednesday. Not May Day. Heroes Day is a Wednesday. And almost instinctively, I would want to say, well, Heroes Day, let me do that curfew. But it is a Wednesday, and under the arrangements, you know that there's no curfew Mondays, Tuesdays, or Wednesdays. So even though Heroes Day is a Wednesday and instinctively we might want to pull back, we've decided to trust Barbadians. So next Wednesday, when you would have been expecting that we would shorten things and bring that curfew in place, we said no, it's a Wednesday, we're going to allow that roll over into the next day. So there will be no curfew. So we're giving Barbadians this. But remember that the COVID directive restricts gatherings, it restricts the numbers of people who can be together outside of their residences. It says no parties, no picnics, none of that kind of recreational activity. We're not robbing you of the extra hours. We're keeping it in place because it's a Wednesday. But we have to ask Barbadians in the same way that we're trusting you with some measure of freedom for that day, that we're expecting that you will maintain the kind of discipline that we expect to help to keep the numbers down. Mr. Speaker, as I end my comments, I will just say that a lot of emphasis has been put on keeping Barbadians in. But of course, what has suffered has been the ability to participate in sports, and the varying sporting bodies have spoken, and I will leave the Minister to go into greater detail. Suffice to say that we are going to allow all sports for practice purposes. All sports for practice purposes only, but no competitive activity. No spectators. The only persons who can be at those practice sessions will be people who are required to be there for the support of the participants and so on. So coaches, and if it's children practicing their swimming, then of course an adult. So we will allow support people, but not spectators. Not spectators. We're allowing football for practice. Football is a central, it's of pivotal importance in many communities, and especially in rural Barbados. And a lot of our youngsters have felt hemmed in, and you know, they're beginning to get a little agitated. So we're going to allow that for practice, but no spectators. So you go practice your football, but the notion that you can have large numbers of spectators around the ground, absolutely not. Those things are not allowed. Mr. Speaker, I think that we've put a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of consultation into trying to come up with a series of protocols that will work for the various entities. That's the purview of the Chief Medical Officer and the COVID Monitoring Unit. At our level, we've worked just as hard and consulted just as much to establish a set of directives that set the broad legal framework and establish a penal arrangement where if people don't follow those rules, then there are consequences that will befall them. Monitoring is key, and I can say to the country that on the bank holidays especially, we're going to be monitoring all of our public spaces using technology, using drones. So there will be drones checking out our beaches and our parks to be able to, in an inobtrusive way, try to determine whether Barbadians are following the protocols or not. And if they are not, then the COVID Monitoring Unit will have to come in and shut down the activity. Mr. Speaker, there is not much that's left now to be reopened. Not much that's left now to be reopened. And let me make it clear, because I was asked specifically the question, can dance studios open? The answer is yes, dance studios could open. You'd recall that in this current directive, we allowed gyms to reopen. In every instance, just let us agree a set of protocols that you're going to follow. But dance studios, for the avoidance of doubt and for those many, many people who've been asking, yes, dance studios and so on are going to be allowed to open. We ask for the patience of Barbadians, and we ask Barbadians to be thoughtful about each other. While you or I may feel that we can get COVID, or that we can spread COVID, or that nobody we know ain't got it, and those kinds of things that are very commonplace, we may feel it, but let us resist the urge to act on those feelings. So I ask you always to assume that you can get COVID, always to assume that you can spread it, and even always to assume that the next person may give it to you. And if you keep those things in mind, then it will not be so hard to decide for yourself what are those things that I must do to look after myself and my family. We've come a long way since May 28th. And we're happy with how Barbadians have been responding so far for 2021. But we've seen firsthand how quickly we can lose control of a very delicate situation. I ask Barbadians to work with us and help us to make sure that we don't get back there. Mr. Speaker, I commend this resolution, and I look forward to the support of all of the members of Parliament in its passage. I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
May I have the second answer?
Honourable Member for St. Michael West. Honourable Member St. Michael West. You need to turn on your mic, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a bit taken aback that the honourable member for the city, the Minister of Health, would not be allowed to speak in this debate. It rather astounds me that his voice would not be heard in this debate. And so if I am to be the lone voice heard outside of that of the honourable member who last spoke, then I make a brief contribution at this time. But I would have thought that Barbadians would have wanted to hear from the Honourable Minister of Health on this matter, and at this time that he's not allowed to make that contribution to this chamber on a matter such as this is rather disappointing.
On a point of order. I raise on a point of privilege, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I raise on a point of privilege because the honourable member has used the turn of phrase twice. And the turn of phrase is use of the word allowed. No honourable member in this place can be disallowed to speak, sir. We cannot be deprived of that right. An honourable member may choose when to speak, but he cannot be deprived of his right to speak. And the honourable member, therefore, having said that, really speaks awkwardly. I believe I know what he's trying to say, but the awkwardness of his delivery, sir, has, I think, violated certainly the privileges that I, as an honourable member, must feel that I have a duty to protect.
Honourable Member St. Michael West, can you continue?
Mr. Speaker, I assure you there's absolutely no awkwardness in that which I have said, and it bears repeating. It is rather disappointing, therefore, that the honourable member for the city would not be allowed. You see, under the rules of procedure of this honourable chamber, as you well know, and in theory, one cannot be deprived of one's right to speak in this chamber once elected by the people of their respective constituencies. But we know that in the context of practice, and regularly so, there are those who would want to speak and who are not allowed to speak from time to time. And it was clearly my impression that the honourable member for the city wanted to speak. that his voice is not heard is rather disappointing. There's no awkwardness in what I'm trying to say. I'm being absolutely clear. And the honorable member of St. James Central can speak for himself when such a yoke is put upon him. He assures us, Mr. Speaker, that it can't happen. We will live to see that yet again with reference to himself. It has happened before, and we will live to see it happen in this honorable chamber insofar as the honorable member of St. James Central is concerned. So we can shout as loudly as you want. They can't stop me from talking. But we know the reality is you can be stopped from talking. And several of you from time to time have been prevented from speaking when perhaps your first impulse was that you would want to speak. So it is disappointing to hear, to understand that the Honorable Member St. Joseph will be getting up to close off this debate, and we will not hear from the voice of the Honorable Minister of Health and member for the city, who usually brings a very genuine contribution and a genuine voice to debate in this chamber. Now, Mr. Speaker, I usually start from this point. I've said it before. I will continue to say it so long as we are faced with the situation that we have to confront with respect to the public health threat caused by the presence of the COVID-19 virus. I always start from this point. Priority number one for me is what is best in an effort to preserve health and life. What is best in our efforts to preserve life and to preserve the health and well-being of Barbadians. And anything which meets that concern, I am willing to support. If therefore we have to further the orders under which we must exist in relation to the public health threat in Barbados, I stand to support that, because priority number one for me is health and well-being and life. So I would stand to support an extension of the current state of emergency powers and the orders that accompany that state of emergency occasioned by the public health threat. What I will ask, as I asked last time we entertained a debate similar to this one, why 5 months? Why not 3 months? Why are we setting as far as September? Why 5 months? I know the legislation gives the power to the Parliament to approve such arrangements nationally for up to 6 months at a time. And I simply ask, why 5? Why not 3 months? What is so significant about the number 5 and a period of 5 months that takes us down to September? The State Department, I think it was, of the United States of America recently issued a no travel advisory against Barbados, and that caused some consternation here, and we were pretty peeved about that, and perhaps justifiably so, and expressed that in formal communications. And it seems to me that to come here today and to suggest that we at this stage would want to extend the circumstances under which we live legislatively for 5 months goes against the same ill spirit which we were seeking to counter and to condemn. If things are improving to the extent that they are, why do we find it necessary today to come and pass a resolution that takes us 5 months down the road? Why not 3 months? If in fact, at the time the 3 months period would arrive and we're still concerned that we need to have these regulations in place and give effect further to this resolution, we could come back and vote for another 2, another 3 months. Seems to me that that is a proper approach to things. This Parliament is supposed to be on Easter break, so to speak, and yet we're summoned here overnight. And I really thought, Mr. Speaker, we were supposed to be here for 11:30. I noticed that it was 11, and And so I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to participate in the debate because I almost missed it. Because I was under the impression we were meeting at 11:30 and not 11. But we were summoned on short notice to come back here today to give effect to this. And there's nothing in the world that stops us from being summoned at short notice or otherwise to come back 3 months from now to extend it if necessary. So my question is, as I asked last time, why 5 months? Now, the Honourable Member St. Joseph, when he introduced the resolution, suggested that these matters are not brought here whimsically. The position of the Office of the Governor General is not arrived at by women fancy, but it is arrived at after considered opinion. And I would want to suggest he didn't go that far, advice, because the Office of the Governor General and Her Excellency herself does not arrive at this position without consultation and without advice. And as I see it in the legislation, that advice is given to the Office of Her Excellency by the Prime Minister herself, the leader of government, and the Prime Minister arrives at her position after consultation with or on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer and the medical professional people. So yes, it is not brought here whimsically, but it is not something which emanates of itself out of the office of the Governor General. It in fact comes out of the bosom of the government, and it comes out of the bosom, hopefully, of the opinion of the medical people who advise the Prime Minister, who further advises Her Excellency, who then communicates to this honorable chamber. I think we ought to make that clear. What we do need to realize, and I hope that persons will not take offense, but if you do, then fair enough. That will not change my opinion or stop me from saying what I'm saying. When we extend these orders, next 5 and next 6 months, what in effect we are doing, Mr. Speaker, in my view, is extending a period under which Barbados is governed by prime ministerial edict. Now, there are those who may not like that language, but that is the reality. Country is right now governed by prime ministerial edict, so long as this state of emergency continues to be declared, and so long as these proclamations are issued and these orders are derived. Country is governed by prime ministerial edict. And I do not know that that is the best situation for Barbados. I do not know that we want to prolong beyond that which is necessary, absolutely necessary, a situation where Barbados is governed by prime ministerial edict. Now, under the legislation, the emergency management legislation, this cabinet has devolved its powers to the Prime Minister when it comes to the matter of the issuing of orders and directives. This cabinet has devolved that power, or delegated that power to the Prime Minister. It means that much of what is issued as a directive comes out of, potentially, the discretion of the Prime Minister, a single individual. Now, you go back to the Emergency Powers Act, which goes back years and years and years. That kind of power is not devolved to the office of the Prime Minister. And I'm talking about the office of the Prime Minister. That type of power is given to the cabinet. But under the Emergency Management Act, this cabinet, by dint of legislation passed in this House, introduced an amendment at Clause 6 to Cap 160 that allows for the cabinet to give the power for making of these decisions with reference to directives, issuing of orders, etc., to the discretion of the Prime Minister. And when we extend this state of things, as we are doing by dint of this resolution, if passed, then we're extending the circumstance under which the country then is managed or governed by prime ministerial edict. Now, prime ministers in the Caribbean political culture, Caribbean political economy, are put in positions where, if they are so disposed or inclined, can become monsters because of the power which is given to them under normal circumstances. Under normal circumstances, we have a special situation here in Barbados where the cabinet is rather large and it swamps the numbers in Parliament. So that is an even further potential threat to proper democratic practice. Now, I'm saying if a person is so inclined, I have not said that the current holder of the office, the incumbent in the office of Prime Minister, is so inclined. I'm not speaking to that issue right now. That will be spoken to at some other time. What I am saying is that, in fact, and in practice, what we are doing here is giving power to a single hand, to, out of that single discretion, make laws which become binding upon the lives of the people of Barbados all across this country. And you cannot extend this thing without bearing that in mind. Now, having said that, I'm not saying there should not be an extension because we're still faced with a threat. My question is whether or not we need to extend it for 5 months at a time from this point. Now, 5 months, interestingly, brings us to an end period just before October, which is a major period of the year for the party now in office, because it's party celebration time. It's party conference time. Now, the truth of the matter is, under these orders and these directives and this state of emergency, we're rather restricted. No matter how much we are opening up and opening up and opening up, we're still restricted with respect to certain types of activity. And a lot of that activity, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of that activity revolves around our political practice, traditionally, historically, our political culture. It revolves around the schedules of political parties in Barbados. So the conference for the Barbados Labour Party, which is the party in office now, comes in October. And that which is a high point for other parties falls quite within the period under which these restrictions will be in place. Now, they can giggle, they can snigger, they can laugh, they can smile. Mr. Speaker, they can do what they want. But these are realities which I must observe and make public note of, so that people who are not perhaps sufficiently close to the situation may be also made aware, may be apprised of. And that is the reality. That is the reality. So I wait with bated breath, if this resolution is passed, to see what happens when we reach September, and to see if in October all things become free and open up again. I wait to see that. And that as we come upon the cusp of the new tourist season, I wait to see that. Now, snigger if you want. The fact of the matter is, on this side, I can stand up and say what I want. Some of you over there may think the same things, but you can't say. You don't dare say. Oh, please, get up and say. You don't dare say. And so, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you. I wish to thank you.
Please allow the member to speak. Please allow the member to speak.
I wish to thank you for the opportunity of contributing to the debate. Like I said, I support anything which is attempted in the interest of preserving the health and well-being of Barbadians and preserving the lives of Barbadians. And then by extending this, we're creating a further context in which we may better attempt to do that. I support that. I simply question the need to do it for 5 months right now at this time, when we can in fact extend it later. And I bring to our attention some things that this country must consider when once we pass measures like this. Yes, that is my position. I thank you.
Honourable Member seated, Bridgetown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would have considered it a dereliction of my duty if I did not speak on this matter in this honorable chamber this morning, especially since it is a resolution that is intended to assist the Ministry of Health and Wellness in the management of a public health emergency, COVID-19. What I could not or did not want to do was to wrap up, because in wrapping up, I would not have had the latitude to speak to some things that I consider to be very important, because I would have had to introduce a few new things into the debate. But I'm here this morning to support wholeheartedly the resolution and to explain, because I know it is easy for people to wonder why it is, since we appear to be doing much better than we were before, why it is that we would want to extend the emergency powers. And I hope that by the end of my presentation here that people would clearly understand the rationale for this. But let me just put a few things out there, Mr. Speaker, to the Honorable Chamber. At the 31st of December last year, we had about 383 positive cases in Barbados. Within a 2-month period, the end of February, we had 3,115 cases, positive cases in Barbados. And I know that there's no honorable member in this chamber, including the honorable member for the city of Bridgetown, who would have thought that on the 25th of December, on Christmas Day, that we would have ended up in the position that we ended up in 2 months later. None of us saw that coming, really. And to be honest with you, had we not been proactive and had we not had the protection of the emergency powers to be able to do certain things and to be nimble, to use the honorable member from St. James Central phrase, in being able to respond to what was a seriously and rapidly developing situation, we would have been in a far worse position than we actually ended up in. And that is as true as John 3:16. The honorable member for St. Joseph would have outlined some of the reasons why we have the emergency powers, but there are some others that are very, very critical. The emergency powers also facilitate a number of things that allow us to move quickly and to do things that we would not have been able to do without those powers. I want to mention, for example, the number of isolation facilities that we were able to have, campuses, as we call them, of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, to be able to deal with positive cases, and quarantine facilities. Also, the presence of the Cuban Medical Brigade is facilitated by the emergency powers, and that brigade comprises physicians, nurses, and lab technicians, all playing a critical and an important role in helping us to fight COVID-19. And the nurses, for example, are not only working within the isolation facility, but equally as important, because of the expansive nature of the testing that we've had to undertake, they are playing a significant role in being part of our swabbing teams, helping us to take swabs of Barbadians in the several centers that we have established for testing. And that is something that this particular resolution, the extension of emergency powers, will continue to facilitate. And that is very, very important. So that we had a situation at the end of March where our number of new positive cases per 100,000 of population was at about 62.8. The previous fortnight, it was at about 113. The previous fortnight. We've been able to bring it down right now to about 39 per 100,000. And we are aiming to get it at 25 and below, so there's still some work to be done. And I want to say that even though we've been able to relax restrictions in a number of ways, because we clearly understand that we really cannot keep the country locked down for too long a period of time. not only because of the loss of economic activity, the loss of employment for several persons, but also the social and psychosocial impact of a lockdown. And our school system, our children are suffering in a large way because of this. They're not able to socialize, and they're missing a lot of that important interaction that is necessary for the development of children. And that is why it is really difficult to continue with the lockdown. So we've had to be playing a balancing act throughout this fight, where we have to balance the public health measures with the other things that are required for persons to at least be able to breathe and to live and to enjoy some semblance of normalcy. And so that is why we've been gradually coming out of lockdown and easing up on the areas of restriction. But at no time would we have said that we are out of the woods. The Honorable Prime Minister has said on several occasions during press conferences, and they would have said that as well, that we are not out of the woods. And we say that because we really are not out of the woods. But it is a question of the ability and the capacity to live with this thing called COVID-19. Because if we do not learn to live with it, then it will defeat us. And remember, there must be no retreat and no surrender. So that's how the battle has to be fought. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, let me just tell you what today's figures are. 813 tests completed at the Best Dos Santos Public Health Laboratory overnight. 14 new positive cases, 7 male, 7 female. All right? 10 people going to Harrison Point for assessment. In the scheme of things, that is good. I haven't worked it out yet, but you can, yeah. But it is good. But there are some things about it, honorable members, some things, Mr. Speaker, sorry, some things that are not good in terms of what we are seeing, and we've been trying to manage this all along. Because out of the 14 cases, we are seeing some families that have been impacted, including a family of 7. And these are connected to current clusters that we have. And we don't have a lot of clusters, but at the same time, there's still clusters. So there's still areas of concern and for concern. And this is one of the reasons why we have to be in a position to respond, because we do not intend, and we weren't napping back in January. We were doing well and we were trying to keep on top of things, and then this surge just hit us and hit us like a ton of bricks. And we are doing everything possible to ensure that in the, I have to say unlikely event, because I hope it would be unlikely that something like that happens again, that we can grab it and we can nip it in the bud. And that is why we are working so hard with these clusters, so that although there have been some easing up of restrictions, the curfew and so on, we still needed a period of time where we can still have a curfew, because even though it is a shorter period of time, it's a period of time that still allows us to be able to have reduced numbers of people on the streets and mingling and operating in a way that could do us all harm. So that is the reason and the rationale to why we are continuing with the extension. We must always be vigilant. And at the moment, I would say that the public health officials, generally speaking, are on top of things. We are on top of things because we have been holding to these clusters like glue, so that we do not allow anything to run away from us. The one that had the potential to run away from us, obviously, would have been the church in the north. And I want to speak to that, because we have been, and I have been referring to this church in the north now for the last couple of weeks or so. And I do not want for Barbadians to get the impression that there are issues with churches being open or allowed to open, because that is not true. The vast majority of churches in this country have been complying with the protocols. And in fact, on occasions I have stated that I was very, very happy that a number of churches were very proactive in actually coming up with their own measures before we started to introduce protocols for churches. That is a fact. So it is not the entire church community, and I don't want for anyone to go away thinking so. I compliment the churches for what they have been doing to help us with the COVID situation in this country. But like anything else, and in all societies, in all aspects, all sectors, there are always persons or groups that will go in a different direction. And that is the case here. So we are still feeling the effects of the cluster of the church in the north. It is impacting a lot of the cases that we are seeing. The positive cases over the last several days have all been linked to the church in the north. And that is why it is important for us to continue to be vigilant, to be our brother's keeper, and to ensure that nothing gets out of hand to the extent that it runs away, and then we are playing catch up and not being able to stop it. And that is why we still have to maintain a level of restriction, even though it is nowhere near where it was a couple of weeks ago. So I'm happy really, and I fully support the extension because it gives us the flexibility to be able to do certain things. I'm really happy that we've been able to keep, and in all honesty, I really cannot imagine what it would have been like if we did not have the Cuban Brigade here. And that this is in spite of the magnificent effort of our healthcare, our local healthcare professionals. But we didn't have the numbers in some critical areas. And this is where the Cuban Brigade was able to contribute significantly to our efforts and enhance our efforts. And that is going very well. And even though things are improving at this point in time, we still have to plan ahead. We still have to look forward. We still have to be in a position to worst case this if something else happens, if there's another surge, that we are ready in all aspects of our operations, with the facilities, with the skill levels, with the communications, all of those things that we, over the last several months, at one point in time or another, we struggled with some of them. Let us be clear. We didn't always get it right. We didn't always have all of the resources to do what we wanted to do, but we had to manage with what we had. And we want to ensure that in the coming months, and especially once people start to fly again and even to sail, that this country is in a far better position, a far better state of readiness to be able to respond to any eventuality. And the extension of the emergency powers will help to facilitate our desire to have that situation. So, Mr. Speaker, that is why I really have to support the resolution, and I hope that people will take it within that context. It's not intended to be a draconian situation. It's just to give the country the chance to be flexible enough, to be nimble enough, to mount the appropriate response if the need arises for us to be able to do so. And so I support this resolution, and I thank the Honourable Chamber for giving me the opportunity to do so.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, by way of wrap up, I don't even know if wrap up is the right word. I think I'd rather phrase it as a response. I feel it is necessary to respond to the assertion by the Leader of the Opposition that there's something magical or something calculated about ending the directive on the 25th of September, just before the month of October. Now, first of all, let me say, I love the Barbados Labour Party, but I never knew that we had a month. I never knew that when I looked on any calendar anywhere that after the letters making it October, they open brackets and put Barbados Labour Party after it, property of Barbados Labour Party. the fact that this directive, this state of emergency will end in September is a function of mathematics, sir. And I'd like to remind the honorable member that the entire period between March 28th last year and March 27th this year was governed by states of emergency. There was no day between March 28th, 2020 and March 27th, 2021 that Barbados was not in a state of emergency. And speaking on behalf of the Barbados Labour Party at our annual conference, which took place at the end of October, physical distancing, mask wearing, all of the protocols were followed. It might not have been convenient, it might not even have been what we are accustomed to, it certainly was not. But if the honourable member of the opposition is seeking to suggest that somehow we are perhaps looking to prejudice other political parties and favour ourselves, very, very far from the truth. If we were going to do that, we would have done it last year. But the fact is that it is a mathematical construct. I hope, I really hope, that at the end of this current state of emergency, there would be absolutely no need to impose yet another one. I believe the leader of the opposition hopes so too. I hope that he hopes so. But if there is, as a responsible government, we will do what we have to do. This is typically leader of the opposition, though, throwing out red herrings across the path and trying to mislead the public. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Chamber for its support in this resolution. I even thank the leader of the opposition for his support of this resolution. This is not about being on any team other than Team Barbados. And in that regard, sir, I am happy to know that he stands alongside us in respect of this particular issue. Mr. Speaker, I again ask that this resolution do not pass.
The question is that the aforementioned resolution do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Question of privilege. I'm not sure I'll be guided by you, Mr. Speaker. I was just asking for an interpretation of the legislation governing this matter. And well, laugh if you would. But I am no lawyer. I have to ask questions. Laugh if you would. You are the Attorney General, the biggest lawyer in the land. My question, Mr. Speaker, is what is the required vote for the resolution to pass? Is it a simple majority of the members present, or is it a majority of the members of the House? Just asking for an interpretation. My interpretation, layperson, is that is a majority of the members of the House, all members of the House, not a simple majority. And if so, that vote just now was invalid by my calculations.
Yes, Nigel.
Mr. Speaker, may I propose that this chamber be suspended for 5 minutes while you consider the issue so as to give guidance to the Leader of the Opposition?
Questions that this honorable chamber
Give guidance to me.
be
give
suspended
guidance
for
to
5
all.
minutes. Somebody second the motion? The question is that this house be suspended for 5 minutes. All those honorable members, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This chamber stands suspended for 5 minutes.